So, Ridge, I'm really excited about this podcast because we have the legendary Jesse Richman, and we've grown up with Jesse, and he's by far one of the gnarliest people I know, and one of the nicest, happiest people I know too. So I think this is gonna be a really fun podcast because, he's a king of the air multiple times, and for anyone that doesn't know what that is, that's like the premier big air kiteboarding event, and these guys are doing jumps where if you mess up, you break both your legs. And Jesse has, in fact, broken both of his legs in this event, and he came back and he won it again. And, he's tapping into the big wave stuff. And, he's just a really, really solid dude with a great family too. And we're raising kids at the same time. So that's pretty rad. So let's get to the show, and I hope you enjoy this one.
Well, sick. Jesse, thanks for coming, dude. Ever since we started, we talked about getting you on because you've been is in a central point on the kiting scene in Maui specifically. From the twin tip, freestyle stuff, big air. We see you at Jaws every time it breaks. So yeah, we're stoked to have you.
Dude, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. I mean, it's what a fun world to explore, and I feel like in kiting, I've tried to do what I see both of you do in your worlds of just look at what's being done and then like, what else can we do and where can we grow and how can we expand? And I don't know, I feel like you two are some of the most well-rounded water athletes on the planet. So it's a pleasure to sit here and chat and see you guys in a different environment except for Jaws.
Yeah, I know. I feel like we see you guys both have kids, both really busy, and I feel like I see you when I see the most at Jaws. That's when we catch up, is in the lineup.
Exactly.
It's pretty sick. Like we had some good paddle sessions too. There was a late season one we had together, right?
Yeah, we had kind of, what was that? I didn't hit the last one that you guys were out there at. I went to Pier 1.
Yeah.
But then there was right before that, I feel like a few weeks before that. So it's like still in March. We had a fun day.
Yeah, so sick. Dang. Well, I'd be curious to go back to when you first started kiting. What drew you into that sport in particular?
I mean, I was like, how old are you now?
28.
28. Okay. So you're like 4 years younger than Kai and me, because Kai and I are the same age. Kai, you're born in October, right? Okay, so I'm like, I got 3 months on you. But I remember just back in the day seeing like the first King of the Air at Hokipa in 1999, and I hadn't started kiting yet. I was just like, what are these guys doing? Like,
what is this?
Insane. And we were doing the windsurf, like I think Alex Aguera and Patty Cadez had like helped organize little windsurf camps. And I just remember going down to that was Kanaha, and just going back and forth, being like, hey, this is pretty cool. And then it was Joe Cool. Do you remember Joe? Yeah. So Joe was friends with my dad, and he handed me a 2.5 Nash 2-line kite when I was 9. And he was like, dude, you'll be world champion one day. I was just like, cool, man, right on. And we went to Giggle Hill and we flew that kite for 6 months. And I just remember being like, how in the world are you going to keep this up for more than 30 seconds? Like, that's actually impossible.
Was it hard to actually continuously fly?
Dude, just flying it. You'd be like, launch it and just, whoa, bunk. And then there was one time where I launched it and I just sent it super hard and I started flying. And I'm like 50 pounds or something, just flying through the air, like, yeah, and just cartwheeled, kite crashed, like mouth full of dirt. My dad's running up to me like, oh gosh, this is not good. And I just remember that feeling. Yes, that's what I want. Done.
Dang. I feel like that would have discouraged most kids.
I mean, that's what now Kai and I are dealing with, I'm sure, of like trying to give our kids a taste of the excitement, but not overdo it. So then they get scared and they're like, oh no, screw that thing. I don't want to touch that wave.
Jeez. Yeah. And that was essentially the birth of kiting, was right when you first started. I didn't realize, but you were just a little kid. And that was, the sports changed. We talk about this all the time, how different it was when it first started. I mean, 2-line versus 4-line, if you can describe to people that may not kite, what kind of change that was, or what it was like learning with just 2 lines.
I mean, it's really funny, and Kai knows because Kai was there. He was kiting, and it basically like 2 lines just means you're full power all the time. You have one control, and that's turning it left and right. The 2 lines control the direction. And I remember back in the day, you would literally, when you were launching your kite on the beach, you'd walk down the beach throwing rocks out of the way for like 100 yards.
I forgot about that.
And then you'd go back and you'd launch your kite and you would just Superman across the beach that far and find like, okay, now I got it. And it was just like, there was no depower. It was total chaos the entire time.
Well, I remember it was like both you and I were so small, and it was like there was the only small kites that existed were like not very good, or they were maybe 5 years old. I just remember distinctly, I think it was the King of the Air trials. At this point, you were already ripping, doing handle passes and stuff, but I can remember it was like the only small kites that existed were like 5 years old. And so you think about even the safety of those, like you had the kids on the least safe gear,
Exactly.
you know, like because everything was every year it was evolving good, right? You know, the equipment was getting safer in a sense because it was getting better.
And I remember that event because I was like, I don't know if I should enter. Like, am I too young? And somebody was like, dude, Lenny's entering. And I was like, all right, let's go. Like, that guy's he's going to enter it. I'm going to enter it. Let's do this.
That was so fun. Yeah, no, it's like, it seems like a lifetime ago, but I was watching some old footage from those old King of the Air days. And, you know, it was actually really impressive what everyone could do with the equipment that they had, you know, and how big they were going. You know, it's nowhere near as big as what's happening now, but, you know, I attribute it a lot to equipment.
Totally. Well, I mean, back to your gear point is a huge, you know, landmark in kiting was the development of 4 lines, which went from just that like side directional control to all of a sudden you have pitch control on the kite, which makes it so you can power and depower the kite. And then in 2005, they had another breakthrough of designing a kite that went almost flat. So you could essentially depower it, not 100%, but, you know, it went from maybe like the original 4 lines, you could spill like 10 or 20% of the power. And then in 2005, they created the bow kite. And that was like, you know, 50, 60, maybe 70% of the power.
Pulling, when you push the bar away, you're basically like putting slack in those back lines, and it's forcing all that energy onto the leading edge, and then that kite is tilting, right? That's essentially what's happening.
You're tilting, and then the wind just flies through it. The kite's flapping because you're not catching any of that wind. And then when you pull it on the bar, you power it up and you tension those back lines, and all of a sudden you're using that as a sail to catch every bit of wind.
Yeah, wow.
So
I distinctly remember you getting, maybe you were on Cabrina at the time, getting one of the first bow kites. Like, I distinctly remember seeing you with it, and you had the tiniest twin tip. It must have been like a 90.
Yeah, exactly.
It must have been, so if you're riding, I don't know, 134 now or something.
Yep.
It was, I think, probably like a 90 cm. So a tiny little board bow kite, but you were ripping because you could float longer too.
Totally. No, that was,
control float.
I mean, slightly controlled. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but what a funny time in kiting.
Yeah. So the development of, I guess, the bow kite, how did that change, I guess, the approach to, I don't know. I know it was huge for wave riding, right? Because it made it so you could kind of more surf more and don't have to worry about maneuvering so much. But how did it affect sort of what you were doing at the time? I mean, I know you did everything, but maybe specifically the wakeboard style.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting shift because the pro riders didn't necessarily like the change because it made a huge amount of kiting, freestyle kiting is unhooking, where you are essentially like taking away any of the utilization of the harness. So you're just holding on to all the power, where 99% of kiteboarding from your average kiteboarder is going to be hooked in. So you actually have, it's like less pull on your arms. It's easier to manage. And the bow kites, the first ones were really challenging to unhook because they had more power. So it was just way more power on your arms. So it made a lot of those technical freestyle, wake style maneuvers a lot harder. But the brands, I was riding for Cabrina, they were like, oh, this is what we want to push. We're going everything into this because for 90-something% of the market, there's no question it's way safer, way easier. And we want the pro riders to be riding what we're trying to sell. So it was initially a not necessarily the best shift for freestyle, but as, you know, a few versions kind of came through, all of a sudden it became like, all right, this is definitely way better than anything else.
Well, it's funny because you're so right, because the early King of the Airs guys were just spinning, and it was one of those things. If you just yanked your kite back and you launched in the air, there was really no controlling it because they didn't turn super fast.
Not at all.
And so it was actually nice because you could dangle and just spin and do things at will, and you're going to come, it's just like that natural trajectory. You're going up and eventually you're going to come right back down. Whereas I think, you know, a lot of the older school riders, they lost all their repertoire of tricks, because then you get in there and those bow kites, or I guess the SLE kites when they turned into, got so sensitive on the bar that you barely pull one side and it yanks that way. But it seemed like that was when everyone started in the big air stuff, leaning more into big mega loops.
Totally.
More than before. Because before, I think it was like the kite wouldn't even catch you if you tried doing like mega loops, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's Ruben Lenton, who's an amazing, complete nutcase of a rider from the Netherlands. And I think that was probably like 2005, 6, 7 is where he really made a mark on the sport by taking it and really inventing the mega loop, where he'd go up, you know, 50 feet in the air and loop the kite. And it went from kind of looping above his head like people had been doing to actually looping below him. And I just remember a few of those. That was like also right when it kind of felt like we were making a little bit of the shift from just magazines to all of a sudden, okay, what is this YouTube? What is Facebook? And just some of his early YouTube videos where you're like, what is even happening? And just, it felt like there wasn't that much content out there. So when one of the legendary riders put out a video, every single person in the sport knew about it and was talking about it. And it was like, wow, he just changed the game. And that was, once we kind of he had created the kite loop, then everything shifted for kiting.
And it's still to this day, that's kind of, it seems like we're, at least the big air side, that's what the focus is, right? How many mega loops can you do? The S-bends and all that. I mean, that stuff that you had been doing for a really long time in pioneering. It's just, that's the most crazy thing you can see on water sports almost. I mean, you see the YouTube videos and the Instagrams, the guy's going almost 100 feet in the air.
No, now it's 37 meters is the record. That's like
That's
130 feet or something.
Really?
Yeah.
Jeez.
And then just the speed is absurd, because as soon as that kite, it looks, I mean, I've never done one, but it looks like as soon as that kite goes beneath you, your trajectory is just like, you're accelerating at Mach whatever.
You're probably doing 50 miles an hour in like 0 to 50 with the kite, like boom, really quick. And then, you know, tell us about that.
Yeah, what's that feel like?
Well, that's like one of the craziest things. And it's always like, I don't know, just watching the progression is really fascinating, where I feel like when I got into the sport, there was the original wave and they had a lot of tricks and they had worked for 5, 6, 7 years to build these tricks. And then I felt like I was a part of the same generation. You're a part of that kind of came in and was like, no, we're going to show you how to really do this. And I feel like the group of kiters that I was with, that I was competing with for years, really owned it. And we created a style where it was like big, huge single kite loops and lots of handle passes. And there was, I don't know, I feel like we would go 30, 35 and we'd be going like 60, 70 feet was kind of like where in the King of the Air, that's the heights that you would see. And in the last 5 years, it's like I had 10 years of competing at King of the Air, and it was basically every year it was the same 5 guys in the top 5, like different order, but it was like a group of us. We owned it.
You owned it. It was like, which one of us is going to win?
Yeah.
Like, you won it twice. Though.
I won it twice. I won it in 2013 and 2020.
That's a big gap, actually.
Wow.
To stay in that conversation for that long in kiteboarding is crazy.
That was such a challenge where I knew I could do it again. But like 2014, I came in after the win and I broke both my legs in the event.
I remember seeing that because we were watching it live here, and I liked your style because I did not know what was going to happen, because it was like you were just on the edge of blowing up, but you were totally in control because you're so strong. And that's what made it so fun. It was so unpredictable. But this one, like with those kite loops, if you just mistime it just by a meter, by a little bit, you're that kite isn't catching you, right? You're just going straight into to the water, and that's what you did. And you guys are riding bindings, and up to that point, there was, I think, Bordeoffs weren't cool for a while, right?
Totally.
Like it was like lame. Bordeoffs are out now. Bordeoffs are in.
That's the only thing you see
But
now.
I couldn't believe you guys were doing 70-foot jumps, mega looping, and then handle passing that high, attached to your board, fully committed. If you fall, you break both your legs.
Exactly.
Yeah, could you walk us through what that specific jump was like that led to that situation?
Well, that was an interesting event, and Kai, I'm sure both of you understand this really well, where the format of the event can determine everything about how that event runs. And this particular event, they were trying a new system where halfway through the heat, your scores would reset to 0. They'd flag one person out. So basically, throughout the day to get to the finals, there's like 8 heats that you have to ride to get to the finals. And you then, in each one of those heats, your scores reset. So you're essentially riding 16 heats to get to the finals.
So fully committed, like you have to go big every time.
And this was a 1-day this one day, you're like, this was, I think, in the quarterfinals, because I ended up 5th in that one. So that would be not the semi. I think that was the quarters. And yeah, at that time, I'm just so tired and running on adrenaline and just like, all right, go. And I'd done a bunch of nice kite loops that day, but the wind wasn't amazing. And I just kind of looked at this one ramp, was like, it's not perfect, but I have a few minutes left. So I need to like get these tricks in. And I launched up, maybe went about 30 feet in the air. And ideally, when you hit the wave, you kind of push yourself upwind to like build a little bit of tension between you and your kite. So your kite is pulling you one way, you want to launch and kind of go against it, so that as it loops, you maintain tension on your lines. And what I had done that one is I like launched going at my kite. So I looped it and it like goes to complete the loop, but then just stops. So then I'm like 30 feet in the air, probably going 30, 40 miles an hour, and I'm just falling. And I'm like, okay, the kite's not going to catch me, but I'm in the contest, like try to land it anyways.
Did you throw a handle pass in that?
That one I was hooked in. This one I was just like a big kite loop, probably back roll. And I'm just looking like, all right, I'm going to land it. So I just stuck my board in front of me and just boom, and like crumpled on my board and looked down. I was like, that wasn't good. Like tried to stand up. I was like, no. Okay.
Well, there's that video too of everyone grabbing you out of the water and you're like borderline passing out from pain and your legs are just dangling and you're still attached to the board. And I'm just like, I never want to do anything like that.
Dude, well, I mean, that was when I realized like, okay, if I would have had Footstraps, that would have been super easy. Kick the board off, pencil dive in, would have been totally fine.
Was Kevin Langare the only one in that event using just Footstraps?
Probably, yeah.
Because I remember there was like a little controversy around that because he's like, oh, you're using straps? Like it was like not core.
It was so funny to see how many times it's switched now between like boots being cool and straps being cool and Bordeoffs being cool and them not being cool. And it's just, I mean, it's
whatever's
so
happening
funny.
now is pretty damn cool. Because I feel like it's everything kind of. But the safety of just having the straps over boots, like for going mega, you know?
It is. I think it's, we have an interesting thing where freestyle, which was basically wakeboarding tricks done behind a kite. That was the primary tour for 15 years, was focused on freestyle.
Low technical.
Exactly. So kite low and really trying to simulate wakeboarding. And it was really cool. It had a lot of momentum. The sport was new, fresh. There was lots of prize money. Big media companies would come in and highlight it on, all sorts of major networks. And then it got so technical that nobody could understand it. So unless you were a kiteboarder, or even if you were a kiteboarder, you started to like, I just don't care what's going on. And now you're watching an event and it's impossible to say who's winning the event. And with big air kiteboarding right now, it's amazing, but I think we're like borderline going down that direction where everything is really, really awesome to watch. But being able to say who's going to win the event or who's going to win the heat is super hard now because there's such small technical differences between the guys who are winning and the guys who aren't. And everything is totally insane.
That is true, because I was watching the King of the Air trials, and I was watching these guys that didn't, like, they make it through the trials, and then they'd get to the main event, like in South Africa, and then they weren't making that heat. And I'm like, but to me, I'm not big air guy, I'm mostly wave riding guy, jump for fun. But to me, I was like, gosh, they're all gnarly. Like, they all look like they're winning, like, I mean, there's like a couple guys where it's like they go that next level higher or their kite's just a little bit lower, and the degree of difficulty, there's little things, but like overall, like the guys that aren't making the heat, you're kind of like, and maybe that's the same with surfing,
Totally.
Like if you're not into surfing, although surfing, I would say it's not as gnarly consistently as big air kiting, because surfing's just like do a really good turn and maybe do one rotation. Yep. Versus going 1440, 70 feet in the air, 60 miles an hour, kites below you. I might die if I don't make this.
I mean, it's also fascinating to see where like now the top 10 guys are like 17 and under.
That's what tripped me out.
Wow.
Then like I remember like they came here, a few of the guys came here last year, and when I was talking to them, I'm like, how old are you? He's like, 16. It's like, how long have you been kiting? He's like, 2.5 years. And I'm just like,
what do you think it is, though? Like,
how is this even possible?
What do you think it is that has led them to going megalodon? Like, because they literally do 32-meter jumps consistently. That's like 105 feet. And you said the record was 37, close to 130 feet. And that is really, really high.
Dude, it's bananas how high it is. And now they're doing it only in a few events. They can only do this in a few places in the world where there's like, not like Maui, you're never going that high.
Just not windy enough.
It's when it is that windy, when it's 50 mile an hour winds here, it's like 20 to 58. It's like such a crazy range that it's just so insane and hard to ride. Where in Cape Town, Tarifa, and this spot in France, it's like consistent 45 knots. Where you're on a 6 or a 7 and like
it's a steady pull,
barely hold on to it, and it's still gusty. I mean, they still have really crazy days, but you have some days where you're just like, you can actually ride in 50 or 60 mile an hour winds, and that's where with the right ramp, these guys are just able to do things, and they're not scared because they've never hurt themselves because they're 17. So you're just watching these like this like fearless attitude. And there's enough of them. There's like 10, 15 guys. So they all look at what the other one's doing and they're like, all right, I can top that. I can top that. So it's this super competitive, insane, crazy level. And I mean, I'm sure we're going to see this out at Jaws. And I'm sure it's already kind of happening where the kids that like you and I, we all grew up watching Laird. We watch, like that whole scene of it like becoming possible. And then you're like, oh, but I want to do an air. I want to do this. I want to do that. And now these 12, 13-year-old kids are growing up watching you, and they're like, oh, okay. Like it's like so doable to get the craziest barrel at Jaws to paddle. Like that's like not even a question of is it possible. That's like
just
they're starting their baseline. Exactly. Yeah. And now they're just going to take that and start running with it. And to see that, to watch that happen in kiting, I'm like, all right, like I'm totally good. Like I feel like I did my part in those events, and now like hell
you did it. You're 2-time king of the air. You're definitely the king of the air of Maui. But
I want absolutely nothing to do with those events now. Like you couldn't pay me to enter one of those.
Really?
I mean, it'd be fun to, but I'm not gonna. There's zero chance I'm gonna push it like those guys are.
Wow.
Yeah, every day it feels like every day I see a new viral video at Tarifa is that they could get so close and they just launch off those ramps. It's so offshore. But I feel like that may be a part of it too. That TikTok generation, it's like if I do a triple mega loop right now, I'm going viral and I'm gonna send it. Like I feel like that is probably a part of it.
Yeah, kiting clips, you either get 7 comments Or if you're going 1,000 feet in the air, you're breaking the internet.
Exactly.
But you have to be going that big to like nearly kill yourself to
Dude, I mean,
get
these
clout.
kids are breaking the internet all the time and just like, damn, this is really escalating quickly.
It's really impressive. I find it really inspiring. To me, I think of all the stuff that I participate in, maybe big air kiteboarding is the scariest thing I could imagine. Much more than even just riding a giant wave. Like the 100-foot wave to me seems maybe less scary than going 100 feet on the kite. Because
Wild.
I mean, maybe it's a comfort thing, which you spend more time leaning yourself into. But, you know, the speed at which, I think it's something to do with the speed at which you're traveling, going that high. You're not going that fast on a giant wave. You know?
I mean, how do you deal with not getting more injured? Because I feel like maybe Robbie Nash is a good example of like a guy who I've seen have a really long career in water sports and not really deal with injuries. And I've definitely been the other end of the spectrum where I've broken half the bones in my body.
You're gnarly.
But like that's just been like, oh, like what I deal with, where I feel like you've been really smart and wise about how you navigate that while you're doing, you know, some of the craziest things that have ever been done in the ocean.
Well, I think for me personally, it's I don't know. You know, I definitely like know when I'm like close to the edge, and I've definitely gone over it. Like sometimes I feel like, and you might be able to relate to this, but when all of a sudden you get through this like weird breakthrough where all of a sudden anything seems possible, that's when it's the most dangerous. You go over this threshold. Fear isn't holding you back, you know. You basically you feel like you have the ability to kind of do it. And because you don't have that fear kind of holding you back, that's when you can like maybe overstep. And I have done that before, but now I feel like I can read the room and I know, okay, I'm just going to float right at that edge and I'm going to get comfortable right there so that goalpost will move farther up. And I almost will like, I'll just get more stable, if that makes sense. There's like a stability there, and then I'll like chase that goalpost up again. So, you know, like now that it's been summer over here, very flat, I've been toying with just kite loops because I like kiting with you and stuff. And I've gotten some slams for sure. But I'm like, okay, it's a time thing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to go out there and be doing Jesse Richman mega loops on Maui. I'm going to do smaller ones, and I'm just going to like get right to where I think I might get hurt doing this and then pull back. And then the next session, get right there. And then there's going to be a point where that I just am really comfortable there. It's just going to move farther forward. And I feel like with big waves, I just took me like 10 years to actually get comfortable to do stuff that I knew. Everything I'm doing now, I've already knew I could do when I first started surfing big waves. But it's just like get to that point, you know? And I've been training like in the gym since I was 12. I don't know how your gym program has been. You know, we've worked in the gym a little bit together too, but I feel like I have a really solid baseline, and all that endurance type stuff has helped me with, you know, injury, like the sup and the foil.
Yep.
And so that's where I think all the other sports doing it consistently has helped me be strong for those big impacts where I could kind of like absorb them.
Yep.
Versus just being one particular way. If you do one thing all the time, you're kind of like your body's set up a certain way.
I mean, being out at Jaws, like you guys have spent a lot more time out there than I have, but now I kind of feel like I started to pick up on your approach of being out there every single time it's good, or not even good, breaking, possible. Like just watching you guys were like, and you don't go out light. You're like, send in everybody. We got rescue skis, boats. We're ready for the entire day. We're out there like before the sun rises. And a lot of those days like are kind of like average days, but you're there. And I always find that frustrating where like the first wave, I feel like almost every year, the first wave of the winter ends up being like the most perfect wave that I have the entire winter. And I'm like, like I just want to like use this as a warm-up wave. But that was the barrel set. Like that was the one.
I feel that. Yeah. That needs to be too.
I feel like you have to be willing to activate the moment it happens. So it's like the more time you can spend in any situation. And that's where I really like appreciate kiteboarding, is because, you know, I think it was Laird maybe back in the day said it's good to scare yourself often. And I feel like, okay, if I can go under a kite, I can scare myself like I'm in big waves a little bit. You know, I don't know why that was funny, but essentially, I can go out like with the kite, right, and pretend to be Jesse, and you know, scare myself, but then you're not desensitized. You're desensitized for when you get into really big waves.
Yep.
And I thought that's why I liked your approach. And we're shifting gears into more big wave chat. I liked your approach kiting because I feel like you're already without being out there as often or as much over the years, you know, mainly when it's really good for kiting, you're already arriving at like the highest level for kiting there, because I'm like, man, something goes wrong. Jesse just mega loops out of the wave and you're already 80 feet in the air and you just look so comfortable, like do 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 do, and everyone in the channel is like, where is he gonna land? But you're like, can land anywhere between them, you know. It's like, oh, I'll just do another heli loop and get over you. But you know, I think there's a couple sessions that I really appreciated from you out at Pe'ahi where I was like, gosh, man, I want to go kite out here again. And a lot of times for me, it's like towing's the ultimate conversion of every sport. It's like you can kind of do everything every sport does, but it's all packaged into one. And the ability to get barreled, which is the closest thing I've ever felt to, you know, getting barreled, might be a mega loop. That initial feeling of like when you loop it and it pulls you and you feel like you're flying for just like a millisecond. Gravity doesn't exist. You know, like that float. So one of the waves would be when you towed in yourself into a wave on the kite, and you know, you're either hitting the lip, but in this case you let go of the bar and actually got drained. And then you came out sick. And then you were able to grab your kite and keep going. Another one was kiting Jaws Kona winds, which is super sketchy because the wind's the opposite. And I can't remember, were you riding switch or you were going regular and then
I would ride backside.
You'd ride backside.
I mean, unlike you guys, I really don't like riding switch.
Which is funny because when you're doing twin tip jumps, you're always riding both ways, you know?
But even twin tipping, like I'm really right arm dominant. So all of my handle passes I do with my right hand. And I remember watching, there was like a few guys where in the tour, it like became a thing where you had to do these switch tricks and do the same trick going both directions by passing the bar with the different opposite hand. And I was just like, I'm just not going to do that. And then one year they like kind of switched, like, oh, we're not going to highlight that anymore. And there were guys that could have been world champion and just all of a sudden went to last place. But I don't know, like, I just like riding a specific way. I like passing the bar a specific way. And I know that, like, talking to Scott about the way that your approach to learning a new trick on your less dominant side, I think that's really cool. And I've tried to utilize that, but I haven't felt like I had the time or the patience to put in to get to the point where I could actually learn new tricks on my less dominant side. But I like the theory.
Is there a specific session you've had out at Jaws Kiting that was like, this was the one? Like this was my favorite session?
Like 2015. There was one day where the challenge about kiting Jaws is 90-something% of the time the wind's too offshore. And then you go up, you like bottom turn. And as soon as you initiate your bottom turn, you can't slow down. And you're going up towards the lip and you want to try to turn and you start to turn and the kite's just pulling you as hard as it can out the back. So to complete the turn is almost impossible. And if you ever try to line up a barrel, once the lines go through the lip, it's going to rip you into the lip. And then, like, a lot of the time, that's when I'll ditch my kite because I can kind of see, like, I want to get barreled. If I hold on to this, I'm going to get smoked. And, like, getting smoked connected to the kite is so gnarly.
Well, we know someone that had that experience. Did you ever hear the story from Nicolo Portella?
Oh, my gosh. He was amazing. What a madman.
Even to this day, I don't know if anyone's ever successfully ridden waves out of Jaws as deep as him.
Totally, he's
like,
nuts.
The only way to do that would be like on a, you know, Sea-Doo in the flats, you know, like. But I remember watching him where the whitewater would be just missing his like front, you know, toe side rail, and he'd just be barely making it. And then he paid the price,
Totally.
which is, I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but like you basically try to eject. And the best thing about kiting over any sport is the ability to go over waves.
Yep.
You know, like closing out Hokipa, jump, boom, boom. It's just like, there's nothing like it. It's better than a wave runner. It's better than anything. But in this case, he jumped, bailed his board, and met the lip, and the lip took him down. And I remember talking to him. I think we were out there afterwards, and he was pretty rattled, but he's a savage. He's gnarly, and most people couldn't handle what he can handle. But he said that he stayed attached to the kite, and all his lines broke, which, I mean, those lines have like
those are like 1,200 pound test lines. So yeah,
and there's 4 of them.
The force is crazy. And I actually I popped my kite that day. So I was sitting on the ski and I watched that one, and that would have been the perfect situation to ditch your kite and just hook into the barrel. Like he was so in the perfect spot to get super drained if he was towing. And it was pretty light, so he didn't have that much power. And just watching him, no, he was on a 9 that day. It was super light, and he just tried. And I was like, no, and just straight into it. And I remember like him popping up and just still holding onto his bar, like, what happened?
I mean, when you drop your kite and then the wave catches it, you like get pulled through the water like nothing else. Kiting is maybe one of the best trainers for big waves, because you drop your kite even on a 6-foot wave, you're like a torpedo underwater when you're attached to it, because you don't want to let it go. But imagine out at Jaws.
Well, I mean, that's why it's a funny thing. I post lots of things of me ditching my kite there. Everyone's like, it'd be nice to just have endless kites. And the funny thing is that I've never, besides on the boat pumping up one kite where I had a bladder twisted, I popped it once. Besides that, I've never popped a kite at Jaws.
Well, the nice thing is it flies out the back.
Exactly.
And
you ditch it and it just floats into the channel, and you have endless space, and we have jet skis. So you're just like, they'll come and get me. I go out there. It's easy.
People that don't understand kiting, it's like there's a misconception that if you let go of the kite, it's gone.
Yep.
If you let go of a wing, it can be. But out there, like you drop it, there's no tension on the lines. The kite just sits.
Totally. I mean, it'll slowly kind of just cruise out to sea.
Yeah, and maybe a little faster than like a rogue paddling gun, but
you couldn't quite swim up to it and catch it.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of the times I have, like out at Pier 1, 3 times that session, I ditched my kite, because when getting work, that's the biggest fear in kiting big waves, is getting wrapped in the lines. So to me, it's just kind of like a non-negotiable. 100% of the time when I fall, ditch the kite, and then it's like you've eliminated that fear. Or like
the risk of
getting tangled in the lines.
And so the fear, I mean, it's not just getting tangled in the lines, it's getting tangled and then the kite powering up, and then you get like
more
cinched,
than the
right?
kite powering up is the wave hitting you.
Okay.
So if somehow you got tangled in your lines and then the wave comes and hits the kite, then those lines tension up. So that's like easy to lose a finger. You could easily kill yourself doing that. Patry coming in from Jaws one time, he was like wrapping up his bar, and just wrapping up his bar. He was a few feet away from his kite, and just the kite like launched, and it wasn't even wrapped around his finger, but it was just like on the side of his finger, and just like degloved his finger.
Yeah, he's missing like the top,
the little nub.
finger.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's like not.
And that happened out of Jaws.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's like not the uncommon thing in kiting, and that is why it's like with all these sports, like there's inherent danger, and especially in kiting, it's like there is a huge amount of danger. It's the same as paragliding. Like super dangerous sport. Totally the risk of dying if you do these dumb things.
Right.
And as long as you like kind of slowly figure out the rules to follow, where like, okay, you can kite Jaws, and if you like start to fall, ditch the kite, and then all of a sudden you've like eliminated that risk. And I've never had a jet ski have an issue with the kite. It is like the skis out there have to be aware that there's a kite and it might come and land on them.
You kind of just have to have your awareness on like where, if the kite's here, the lines will be over here.
Exactly.
And if you have that awareness, you'll never suck it up.
But that's
hopefully
that's a thing with kiting though, that is so gnarly about it, is that the margin for error is so small. Like you said, you make a few little mistakes, it could really be bad. Like say the example of the mega loops, mistiming it, it's like I'd compare that to say like what Kai was saying, like riding 100-foot wave. you can do everything wrong in a 100-foot wave. And, most of the time you're going to pop up fine. It's like there's a small chance something could really go wrong. But if you really screw up a 30-meter mega loop, like the odds that you're really getting hurt is pretty high.
How much faith do you have in your inflation vest?
I take care of it, but I guess you train for it not to work. Yeah.
I mean, that's why we always wear like the impact foam wetsuit, because that foam wetsuit will get you up pretty quick. And,
Totally.
I'd say you've been to Nazare, for example, and Nazare is the classic example where if you're in the wrong spot, you're the worst wipeout of your life and you might die.
Totally.
But if you're 10 feet to the left, 10 feet to the right, it's so aerated. And this goes the same with like Jaws. These waves, sometimes the smaller big waves are way more, throttling than a giant one. Because when they break, they suck so much air into the water. It just aerates. And the cauldron of bubbles brings you back to the surface.
Yep.
Now, if you fall on a 100-foot wave, in your mind, you're probably thinking you're going to die. But there's a good chance you could pop up in 10 seconds flat.
Yeah,
sure.
And be like, I'm okay. Whereas I think Ridge's point, do a 32-meter jump, and if you mess up, you're falling.
Yep.
And you're just accepting at that point, I might not die, but I'm going to break everything.
Totally.
Because it's not like jumping off a cliff that's 100 feet. I'm getting slingshotted at 60 miles an hour back to the water from 100 feet.
With like a little bit of an uncontrollable rotation.
Yes.
You're like, no.
So, hey, tell us about your experience. I remember you telling me you were going to go kite Nazare. And having been there quite a bit up to that point, I was like, gosh, like now I'd be willing to maybe do it, having spent more time. But like knowing what I knew and when you were going, I was just like, gosh, you're kiting only the right into the cliff. It's nuking. The bumps are massive. What happens when you kick out? You're not getting on a jet ski. You have to be willing to lose all your equipment. And, granted, you probably could get the biggest wave ever kited, ever surfed, ever anything out there. But how did that feel like? I'm flying over to Nazare. I'm going to go kite. And you got some really big waves. You also had some big jumps trying to avoid really big waves.
Well, I just loved, I had the most amazing safety team out there, and these two guys were like, okay, so when you're going out, this is super technical. You basically, it's not like a one set wave. It's like you have to zigzag. And I was just like, I can't zigzag. I don't have a jet ski. I'm a kite. I can go this way.
General
I can
direction.
go this way or into the rocks. And they're like, oh, well, that's not going to work.
What year was that?
That was 2017.
So that was that's still that's
early
early kiting.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, I mean earlier, but that's almost 10 years ago. That's crazy. But I don't know. It was wild. Where I always thought, I was like, it has to be some sort of an optical illusion. It's like from that cliff angle, and I just remember staring there in the morning, like, oh, it's not. It's really that big. And we show up, and that was the day that Andrew Cotton broke his back, and they're rescuing him. I was like, all of a sudden we're running down and helping pull him out of the water. I was like, holy shit, this is heavy. Broken back. They're like, all right, let's go kite. And just looking at that place, I was like, this makes no sense. How this doesn't make any sense at all. You're on a 50-foot wave and you kick out, and there's a 70-footer coming this way. You're like, what? But
did you launch from the beach and go out, or
No.
did you launch from the water?
I launched from the water just because looking at that shore break, it was windy, and I was on a 7-meter, but it still wasn't that windy. And the way having the cliff right there, it didn't help. It didn't suck the wind through. It kind of the wind bounces off the cliff. So a lot of the time you're riding and you don't have that much power. And I was just completely confused. And it's one of those things where I want to go back there to ride it again to try to figure it out. But also I don't want anything to do with it. It was totally terrifying. But the second day was slightly smaller. Total blast. That's when I was like, all right, the kind of 3 lined up peaks. You can really have fun with it. I'm not worried about dying.
Were you at the first peak, mainly the right off the first peak, or were you second
to
peak?
do the basically my goal was to ride the right where you could kick out like the big right. I think you have that crazy photo
So,
on
like,
where
the
you could
second
kick
peak, yeah.
out and be like right on the rocks, but
Yep.
kicking out downwind of the rocks.
Yep.
Just because upwind was kind of like smaller and bumpier, and that was where the big left. I was trying to ride the right on the big left.
Okay, so you were going. I think you were at Big Mama, which
Exactly.
is the outside of the first peak.
Yep.
Where I caught my wave was actually, they call it 1.5. So it was the right goes into the left,
Gotcha.
and then it's like under the cliff.
Yep.
But that's what, if you go on a Big Mama day, at least with that, there's 10,000 feet of water, and you just got to go in the general direction.
That's the goal, because
Yeah.
like at Jaws, I'm never really worried about dying. I'm like, okay, I need to take a set on the head. It's going to suck, but like, that's why we train.
and it's so like organized.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's an order to it.
Dude, out there, I'm just like, oh, like this, like now 9 out of 10 routes that I see are like getting impaled on the rocks.
Well, the craziest thing is like, that's the thing with wrapping my head around. I'm like, if you ride a proper wave, the chances are there's always that backup wave behind it, whether it's as big or not. It's not an 80 footer, but it could be a 60 footer following, and it always breaks in the channel. Like most beach breaks, you know, you get a barrel, and then when you're paddling back out, the next wave always shifts over into that channel. And I was like, sick. I think what you would do is if you were really like, what do you want to lose, your board or your kite?
Yep.
Like, I think you'd probably have to like let go of your kite, just be like, you know, single use kite, go on the rocks, you get your board, get on the sled, or you try to get onto the jet ski with your kite, no board, but I think you'd get ripped off, and
For sure.
you'd become one with the lip of the next wave.
Dude, it was so chaotic. That's the best way I could say to describe it.
Yeah, well, I hope you go back there because it'd be fun to watch. And
It'd be fun to ride it with you.
yeah, I mean, gosh, Nazare is one of those places, once you're there and the ice is broken, you like start having fun with it. But like, we live in such an epic place with one of the best big waves right here.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes hard to like remove yourself from this to there, because it's like 24 hours on an airplane.
Yep.
And you're just like, wait a second, what am I doing?
And you're also like flying there, and you're kind of waiting till you know it's going to be good. So then
Jet
you
lagged.
show up and you're like, all right, in 12 hours, let's go try not to die. Cool. Perfect.
Yeah. Jeez. And what do you think you can go past the 37-meter threshold if you sort of line up with a huge wave? That's what the videos I've seen at like Tarifa, they really utilize the waves to get that extra pop.
So what the thing they're doing is that spot is so good for a number of reasons. One, it's straight offshore winds. So instead of using the wave just as like a ramp that you're going off, you're able to load up against it.
Oh, I see.
So you're riding, just pushing on that wave for as long as possible, and it's like cresting, and you're like pushing against that, and you think about your lines as like a spring, is you're just loading that up as much as possible. And that place is really crazy because right upwind, there's a little like 20-foot tall jetty that cars can drive across. So it's water, so the wind's coming straight across the water. It hits this jetty, and then you have this kite spot right downwind. So the wind gets pushed up.
Oh,
So
wow.
literally you're riding, you're loading up against this wave, and the wind's pulling you up. So when you actually like release off the wave and you launch in the air, the first time I rode there, I like started laughing. I'm just like, this is a joke. Like, you go so high. It's insane.
Wow.
So should the king of the air be there?
I mean, that's one of there's like 3 spots. There's a spot in France, there's Cape Town, and there's Tarifa. And the 3 spots are like, that's every single crazy big air kite move that you see is going to be at one of those 3 spots. I mean, I guess
not
it's like
launching
big
off
wave.
a Nazare wave.
I don't know. The thing that's hard is, even though if you're going like straight at the wave, the wind's going up the wave. So you're going with the wind. So that kind of kills all that tension.
But like if you're on like a big Jaws West Bowl, I feel like you could sort of, and it's an offshore day, in theory, if you're on a twin tip, you just load up on like a 40-foot wave.
Totally.
And that thing's moving so fast in.
The only thing I see the problem with that is like, yeah, it's good because it's 40 knots on the wave, but the moment you loop and send it, it's only 15 knots out the back.
True,
Like there's not a lot of wind, right?
So that's like a crazy thing out there is, yeah, you get, and that's usually what I end up doing is I'm on a wave, it's sick, and you're like, I really want to ride this wave. And if I was towing, I'd be able to like, that's where I'd cut back and start to like line up whatever I'm doing. Kiting, you're like, I can't get down there. I'm up here, so I'm just gonna like try to slow down, and then at the last second, full speed, use the wind coming up the face, and then that lip to like jump, and you do get shot super high there. So it is possible, and I've always been torn between taking out a twin tip there on like one of those days and trying that, and then just like no, put the reps in, go out there on my surfboard, like focus on what I want to focus on.
It's a long days out there. I feel like there'd be time for a couple.
I know, but I don't have the
And you
endurance
have, like,
that you guys have. You guys are gnarly. I have like 2 or 3 hours where I feel good, and then I'm tired, and then I'm done.
Yeah, I feel like that too a lot. And that's what Kai's really pushed me is that when I first started, I was like, I get 4 waves and I made it, and I'm like, I just want to go home safe. I'm done.
Yep.
And I feel kind of tired. And then he's like, no, you just have to push through it. And then it's almost like you click into a different gear where your body's like, oh crap, like we're staying.
It's survival.
And then you go to a
trick your
different
body
mode,
into survival.
and then you get like a second wind, and that second wind almost takes you like it lasts you the whole day. Like
Yep.
I usually have 2 hours where it's like the baseline, and then I get tired, and then once you push past that, it's like okay, I could go 6 more hours now.
So I always find this like an interesting challenge of like, do I push through? Do I be the man? Do I like tap into this next gear that I know is there? Or do I like try to respect it and be like, hey, I'm tired, I'm just gonna chill? Because I do feel like a lot of the time when I've pushed through, that's when I like get a gnarly wipeout and like tweak my ears. Like I have issues with my ears a lot. And that's like, all right, that takes months to kind of feel better from. So, I mean, how do you guys play with that kind of line of being like, I'm tired and I know it, and I'm kind of being irresponsible versus like, let's tap into that next gear?
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, me personally, this year has been a little bit different for me because the last year I was sick a lot and I couldn't train like I usually do. And I would push myself until my legs would start literally cramping and the muscles were failing. And that's when I'd be like, I can't physically do this anymore. But in the past, there's been times where I think I'm tired and my brain's telling me like, oh, you're tired, just don't go. And then I realize I have a lot more left. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that too.
Well, for me, I just know how much more I actually have in the tank. There's like a comfort limit where you're like, oh, I'm starting to feel a little uncomfortable now. Like I'm tired and I don't want to wipe out. And you start that. But then I know from a lot of experience that if I can break through that threshold, all of a sudden, like it's like I'm pulling energy from somewhere else, like universe. Like it's just, I almost like get more energy somehow. Like there's nothing blocking it. And it's like this next threshold. Maybe it's a survival instinct. But the way I do that is it's all done in the summer. It's all done in semi-controlled environments. I've been racing the channels on either, a sup, prone paddleboard or a foil. And in order to win those races, you have to have a mental breakdown about 3/4 of the way. And then you like break through that threshold. And, I got so used to being able to break through the threshold because that was the only way to win. If you do not break through that threshold, you're not winning. You have to be willing to suffer, and you have to be willing to be comfortable suffering. And there's such a high that comes from that. And so in order for me to break through that threshold in big waves, it's really low because while it is very physical, a lot of it is more mental. Whereas I'd say the channel crossings, like on a foil to win foiling, it's super physical and it's super mental. It's both of those things. Though if you stopped, and that's the mental part, I can stop and quit the race, but then I have to live with it for an entire year. And that suffering is worse than just suffering for the next hour and a half.
How do you deal with losing? Because I feel like I personally try to not enter events that I'm not really confident I can win. and you enter events in like 100 different sports and disciplines
And don't win.
well, no, like you win, you like have a long list of accomplishments, so we don't need to like go into ego stroking. Kyle, you're awesome. We all know you're awesome.
No.
But to then put yourself in a situation where you're like, like everybody else is foiling every single day, and that's all they do, and they're training for these downwind events, and that is 100% of their life, and you're doing 47 other things and raising kids. How do you deal with like entering an event that you're optimistic about and then losing?
For me, in a competition setting, I will get significantly better than just free riding. Even it helps when you're riding with guys that are better with you. You know, if I go kiting, I'm kiting with you, I get pushed. But when you're in a competition setting and something about having that singlet on and there's like that external pressure, that's when I feel like I get the best out of me. Felt like my biggest gains in big waves in the paddling, because that's all there really was. You know, for the big wave surfing out at Pe'ahi was like those events. Because like by the end of it, I was doing stuff that I wouldn't be willing to do because you're in, you know,
it's the
tight time frame. And I always keep that in the back of my head that like, okay, the reality is these guys, this is all they do and they focus on that. And I always try to keep a champion mindset where anything I enter, even though I am probably the least likely to win because I've put the least amount of time into it because I'm doing 12 other things. When I enter, I just go into it like I'm going to win 100%. And maybe it's a little bit delusional. And nowadays it's a lot harder to win anything because everyone's so refined and so good in these particular things.
Specialized, it's crazy.
Yeah, more specialized than ever. And the nice thing is back in the day, the specialized people wouldn't put in the work. But now these really talented guys are all putting in the work. So how do you beat, you know, somebody that's really talented? You usually outwork them. But when, you know, talented people are working really hard, it gets harder. But when I lose, and I definitely lose more than I ever win, I can't even remember the last time I really won something that wasn't like at the end of the year award. For me, it's like all that, you know, bull crap in your mind, all the excuses, it gets wiped off the table. All of a sudden you just see what you have to do better. And I'm just like, there's just no excuse. Like, I'll just suffer more. Like, I'll push harder. I will just like go, like I can push way harder. And the mind holds you back so much. And I'm talking about these endurance races, for example. But I just think like, I just learn a lot and I love learning. Like that's why I do all these sports, is because every single day it feels exciting because I'm learning something new and I can change it up. But I mean, just in short, to answer that question, it's like, not do it, then, well, what if I just do it? Who cares? Like, I'm not, at the end of the day, I just want to get better. I want to be better. And eventually, maybe I'll win. You know, you throw enough darts at the board, maybe one will stick.
Well, I feel like with the internet and what it's become, it's pretty cool because you don't need an event to win. And I feel like you two in particular are very good at like winning the internet.
Let's try.
But it's like a really cool thing where you're just like, I don't need a contest. I don't need anybody. I'm just like going to take my idea and go and do it and bring a little action camera with me to show you what I did. And I just like invented something new.
Jeez. I mean, speaking of gnarly things, and before we let you go, I need to hear this story, is the legendary tow up in Hood River.
I was just thinking that. There was two that I have, and one of them was that.
Yeah.
That one was a really funny one where you guys remember Bam Bam, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, this guy, John Melberg, who was he worked at Nash, but he was like a mad scientist, incredibly skilled. He passed away in a paragliding accident, but before that, I looked at him one day, I was like, hey, so you have this like rig on your boat that you take paragliders up? He's like, yeah, of course. He's like, I'll take you up right now. I was like, well, how high can it go? He's like, I got a 5,000 foot rope. Let's go.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, whoa. Like, no, come on. That's really dumb. Like, that is the dumbest thing I could ever imagine.
Too?
And I like left Hood River. That was in Hood River. And I left that. And I was like, like, that's kind of a funny idea. Like, I kind of like that idea. So I spent a year kind of prepping and putting together like how my rig would look. I used a speed flying harness because I wouldn't trust a normal kite harness in that situation.
What's the difference?
A speed flying harness is like a paragliding. It's basically like a base jumping, a really skeleton base jumping rig.
Does it go around your legs?
That one's shoulder straps, leg straps, waist strap.
Oh, wow.
But
Oh,
it's
wow.
super, it's like a big paragliding harness has a lot of padding. This one has no padding, but it has the structural support. And it's built to just like hold yourself under a canopy. And then I worked with Damien Girardin from Nash. And I was like, all right, let's build a kite that's like as reinforced as humanly possible. Build me a bar that's like, we thought about a few of the different connection points in the bar where he was like, it's strong. I was like, but if it could break, where would it break first?
Yeah.
And we kind of specialized the gear. Hindsight, a lot of the modifications we made might have made it weaker.
Well, that's funny you say that because I remember talking to Damien years later, and he's like, yeah, it turns out doing double stitching actually just made it way weaker than just doing single stitching across the whole kite. But we found out afterwards.
we might have double perforated the kite. But I got this kite. I went to Hood River and I was like, all right, talk to Bam Bam. He's like, yeah, dude, any day, it's good. And I was there for a month and I was waiting for the right day and I was waiting for the right day. And
What
finally,
kind of day were you looking for?
pretty light wind because I had a 12 meter and he does that paragliding in almost no wind. Because you don't really need wind. You use the speed of the boat going up, up along the river. And actually the smoother the water is, the easier it is for the boat to build speed, which
Got it.
creates apparent wind. And paragliding, you don't need any wind to fly. So you can like go in zero wind and then just slowly fly down. For the kite, I was like, we want like 10, 15 knots of like a steady breeze. And finally one morning, it was like a few days before I left now. And I was like, dude, we're just doing it. We're going. And we went and we did a practice run in the morning and it was like 15 to 30 knots. And I was like, let's just do like 100, 200 footer. And I did have a base rig on. This time, the practice run, I was like, I'm not going to take the parachute because if you get it wet, then it's kind of like you have to repack the entire thing. So I did like a 200-foot one that worked really well. I was like, oh, that's pretty easy. And then we were like, oh, that's probably the most dangerous thing I could have done. That was like
Because
more
it's like
dangerous.
low, right? Than being super high.
Basically above 80 feet, 90 feet. That's where like if something goes wrong, it could be fatal. So 100 to 300 feet, that's the most dangerous zone.
So you're like, let me practice the most dangerous zone.
But once you get above 300 feet and you have a reserve parachute, then the higher you go, the safer it is. Because the more time you would have if something breaks for your reserve chute to deploy. Because that takes about 180
If
feet
you never
to deploy.
base jumped up to this point.
At this point, I didn't no base jumping, no paragliding. I did
Well,
like
you didn't
a
even
one.
paraglide back then because now
No.
you're a really good paraglider.
But this was before that. So
Oh,
this was just
wow.
like, oh. And then we finally were like, all right, we're just going to do it. And I just went and started flying and like launched the kite, connected to the boat. He like hit the throttle. We start going. And immediately I'm like in front of Hood River, like just like climbing.
Did the river look really narrow and you saw both Washington and Oregon on
Dude,
one side?
That was my whole goal of it. I was like, the view looking down on the gorge is going to be sick.
Was it sick?
It was insane. And I just started climbing and climbing, but it was hard because there was so much drag from everything. The line, there was a lot of drag. My kite, there was a lot of drag. So it wasn't like a swift, easy whoop. It was like
you could feel it
it was
dragging.
5 minutes to get up to 800 feet.
No way.
And as we're going up, it's so much tension. And I'm just like hitting different layers of wind where it's like at one point it's pretty smooth.
Where you're
and then
like, is this thing going to hold?
And then like about halfway up, I started hearing this like tick, 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 tick. And I was like, oh, and I had it set up so that the reserve parachute was connected to my quick release. So basically, if I hit my quick release, I would pull the reserve chute. So I get to the point where I'm like, oh, I hear my lines breaking. Like, okay, this is not like, here we go. Like I have this chute, like, all right, this is going to be exciting. And it just kind of kept on holding. And we kind of had this plan of like, I'm going to hold on because I have a release of the rope to the boat until he stops the boat. And he was like, I'm going to get you as high as I can. And,
he's still going. We could get him higher.
And he has this winch it's a hydraulic payout winch. So he set the pressure at which it would spool out. So it wouldn't just spool out.
Okay.
It would spool out under a certain amount of load so that it keeps me kind of like going up. So it
versus
doesn't-
just going down.
Exactly. Because
Yeah.
if he just let it spool out, I wouldn't have enough tension on the line to climb. I'd just
Right.
kind of go down. So it's like a little bit of this intricate game. And then once I got to the top, I see him stop the boat. I pull the thing. I'm like, all right. And I thought I could just hold on to the kite for a second and kind of like maybe just float for a second. And then as soon as I dropped, I realized I'm used to kiting in wind going sideways. So you're kind of like your kite has wind coming at it this way. And then I immediately realized that now the wind speed doesn't matter because I'm falling. So now the wind is coming up and like together in the air, we're just like the wind speed.
Were you like,
we're
I'm
just
going to hit the bridge?
Well, I just all of a sudden am now like go from kiting this way to kiting this way.
Oh,
And
my
I'm looking
gosh.
up and I'm just looping uncontrollably, spinning uncontrollably, like, holy shit, this is really out of control. And the entire way down, I'm just looping, spinning, like, whoa, what is happening? Like I'm on one of those, like that like boat at the county fair.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
Wait,
whoa!
how high did you go when you let go?
790 feet.
Wow.
And yeah, finally, like, once I got down
Did
to
the
like
FAA
50
call?
feet, and we did call the FAA because they do run low flights in there. So we kind of let them know. Or
There's going to be a kiteboarder at 800 feet.
Exactly.
What did it look like looking down on all the other kiters?
it was-
Were you just like peasants?
It was amazing. And I landed and I was like, okay, that was like, yes, I want to do more of that. And I wish like it's hard because you really want to use specialized gear. You really want to go and get the proper training. And there's such a world to explore that these kites aren't designed for, that I'm not really well trained for. But it is like, I think there will be at some point a really skilled kiteboarder that spends a huge amount of time training for that style of thing, and he'll do crazy things.
Kite the clouds.
Dude, I mean, there's so much you could do. That's why I was really excited to get one of these winches, is just like on random days here, just go and do toe ups, because it's such a different way to like work on like learning how to like, you're like, all right, whip yourself up to 100 feet. Now you can play around with looping your kite different ways. And it's just another way to kind of explore, to learn something new.
Wow.
What for like the super tall stuff that you did? Would a ram air kite work better? Like more
Totally.
the canopy, or it's like a parachute canopy.
Yeah, and you're part of Ozone, and they're some of the best paragliders in the world, and they also manufacture the squirrel suits. So I don't know, you might not be done yet. You got all the team behind you.
There is
and you
one
got us
jump.
cheering you on.
There is one jump that's like a 1,200 foot cliff that I won't name the location, but it's perfect. And I'm just so ready to jump.
Can you
off
tell
the
us
top.
off camera so we can come watch?
Yeah, it's one of those things where you don't want to upset the locals. You don't want to do like set the wrong example. So I want to be
course.
really
Yeah,
respectful.
yeah.
But there's so many random things like that where I'm like, it'd be really fun.
Well, okay. And how long did your lines get stretched from that single jump?
Afterwards, the lines were all stretched like multiple feet.
Because your lines were at 24 meters?
They would have been 24 meters, and they were like all stretched different. They were all different lengths within like a foot. The kite you looked at, and there was like all these weird dimples on it. And
because it was getting contorted so much.
Well, that was such a crazy load. Like these kites aren't built to have a boat pulling them. So you
Right.
just are like, all of a sudden it goes from me holding on to the kite to I'm just like a link in the chain, flying the kite at the very end, but the boat's like flying the kite, and that's what's pulling it. So it was just such a crazy amount of load.
Yeah, I just remember talking to Damien, the designer, and he was like, yeah, it was like 8 feet or longer per line. And I was also thinking, when you're spinning and your lines are chafing against each other,
Totally.
it's like cutting itself eventually,
There's
it's like
so much that could go wrong.
And I saw that, and it was like, I was like an adamant, no desire, nope. But then again, when I think that way, I'm like, I think of people that do pass away, and that's, the ultimate price, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, like, we're all going to die one day. And to live your life being afraid of anything, that's a hard thing for me to swallow. I don't like feeling afraid of stuff. And I would say I'm more afraid than many, but I just, take time to get there. But the point is like, part of me is like, I want to do what Jesse does, only to not be scared of it.
I mean, I really respect your approach in the water, because I think despite you both being some of the craziest people in the water, you guys, I really feel like are some of, if not the most calculated ones. And that's really what it comes down to is like, look, it's a numbers game and just being like, like I feel pretty good about this. I know I have all these different options. I have all these routes out of here. Like, yeah, we're going to send it. And if something goes wrong, like I have 17 backup plans. All of them are feasible. And I've done a few things in my life where I'm like, like that was like a 50-50. Like that afterwards, I was like, that wasn't smart. But now I'm like, okay, like 90%, I feel pretty good about that. And you guys are a huge inspiration on that front.
Dude, thank you. Well, that means a lot coming from you because you're our inspiration.
Yeah, I love it.
But the final one, and this is what I had in mind. I was like, oh, we have to ask Jesse about, his kite tow up in Hood River. But the other one, and this came through to me through the grapevine because I'm sponsored by Tag Heuer, but you were filming a movie and it was like, I think the first time you had ever snow kited and you were like in Norway. And I just heard from the grapevine that you thought it would be a good idea. You're kiting up this giant mountain and you tried doing a little jump and, a gust of wind caught you and that gust took you off the mountain and you went from being, maybe 50 feet above the snow to all of a sudden you were like 2,000 feet above the snow. And
what?
You like the wind was pushing you off the mountain and you had to steer yourself back to the mountain. And they were filming, but they were like kind of closing their eyes because they're like, is this guy gonna die right now? Tell us about that.
Well, that was a really funny one. Do you know Thierry Donard from Nuit de l'Église? And I was filming with him. We had this kind of cool concept of there was Matahi Drolet and a few other Tahitian surfers where they had taken a few of these free ride world tour amazing backcountry skiers and snowboarders out in Tahiti and kind of like took them to Chopo and towed them into some waves and got them out of their comfort zone. And then they're like, all right, now it's our turn. So they took us heli skiing in Norway in the fjords, and it was like unbelievable. And I'd done one heli trip before that, so I had a decent amount or like a little bit of snowboarding experience under my belt. I was
like
out of my comfort zone. But I was out of my comfort zone. But I was like, all right, like at least I'm not like the Tahitians that have never snowboarded before.
They have never seen snow until that moment, huh?
And there was the funniest thing and they immediately started ripping, of course. But we did like this week and it's amazing. And finally I was like, guys, I need to take a kite up on one of these, on one of these runs. Like, don't worry, it'll work. And
what size was it?
I had a 17 meter and 17 meter Nash draft, which was just like this beast of a kite. We get dropped on this tiny little peak. It's like a 5 foot wide ridge. And I kind of look and I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? Like,
how am I going to launch this thing?
And so I basically like pumped up the kite up there and I told these guys who don't know what a kite is, I'm like, so just hold it right here. And there is zero wind, like not a stitch.
Oh, really?
And this was before I learned how to paraglide. This was kind of what inspired me to paraglide. And so I
you
kind
did
of
paragliding completely backwards, totally. I'm guessing.
And so I was like pumped up the kite. I set it so it would be like a hot launch. And I literally jumped off the cornice and then stopped and skid down the hill. And it's like, these runs are super, super vertical. And I'm slowly like unwinding my bar, sliding down the hill.
And you had previously like walked your lines
I'd already walked my lines out. So everything's connected. And I told everyone, I was like, all right, so then I'll pull the kite out of your hands and I'm basically going to speed fly. Like, you guys will all jump down. You'll be riding on the mountain. I'll be like riding my snowboard right next to you. And then I'll pop up, do a little air and then land back down. And I was like, all right, what could possibly go wrong? And as soon as I like start riding down, I pull the kite up and I'm like, oh, it's flying pretty good. All right. And then I kind of pull in. And I get launched up. I was like, all right, I'm flying. And then all of a sudden I'm like, woof. And I was like, oh, I might have really underestimated how much lift I would get on a 17 meter. And I'd snow kited in mountains like this before, where you kind of like glide out and you're like, okay, like you get 100 feet in the air. Like, cool. It's like that. So you glide out and you're like, oh, I'm 50, I'm 100, I'm 1,000 feet. Oh. Yeah. And that's when I like, all of a sudden I'm like, I don't have a reserve parachute. That was dumb. I didn't think I'd go this high. And I just remember like hear Des from Nash pop into my head, and he's like, dude, don't worry, I hand tied all the bridles myself. This kite is solid. And I was like, I'm really just putting all of my faith my entire life now. Like this is one of those situations where if one thing goes wrong, it's like no question death.
Oh.
And of course I wanted to like start looping in and get radical, but I'm like, all right, let me just try to get back down, because this is way more, a bit off way more than I thought. And I ended up like kind of like soaring over these different ridges and kind of like a 5-minute flight trying to get back down to the mountain.
Wow.
And eventually ended up circling back down and landed exactly in our LZ, exactly where the helicopter was supposed to pick us
you
up.
You basically just I
didn't touch the snow once. Flew the entire way, where I'd told them like we had all these stop points where we're gonna stop here and stop there.
Were they just baffled? Like,
dude, I just hear the radio
looking up
where
at
they're just like, the kiter has completely lost control. They're like, where is he going? I don't know. I get to the bottom, Thierry, this little Frenchman who's amazing. He walked up. He's like, okay, let me take this kite. You're never having this back. It's done. You're done. We're done with this shoot. We're done. He's like, and I have a doctor. I need to bring you to a doctor. You need to talk to him.
Oh my God.
You just freaked out everybody.
Dude, I was like, so it was one of those moments where you're like shaking and you're like, okay, that worked. It's all good. I survived.
No, it's like, that's the gold, you know? And I mean, that's what I can really appreciate from you is like the radical stand, but I know where you came from to get to that point. This doesn't happen overnight, similar to like ripping in big waves. It doesn't just happen overnight. It takes your whole life up to that point, right? I mean, you've been kiting since you were 9 or younger. And that was illegal probably back then.
Totally.
You've just been at and this is what I've come to the conclusion. You've been at every sketchy moment of kiteboarding up until now. And the sketchiest is yet to come, I'm sure. But you've pulled it off with grace. You've won championships, multiple world champion, king of the air multiple times, arguably the best big wave kiteboarder, all those things. And it's been really fun to watch, and just trying to keep up a little bit, you know, on the kiting front. And it's been fun. I can't wait to see what you do next.